Hello, collaborators, singers. Some of you are probably very good friends. I'm Rose Freeman, and this is going to be my contribution to the Chicago Vocal Arts Consortium's digital seminar series. We're going to specialize today on acting techniques and looking at text analysis because that's something that we can do when we're looking at our characters and when we are looking at isolation. My goals for you at the end of this is to walk away with some key acting techniques that are rooted in what is traditionally called American realism. We're going to be looking at a lot of acting techniques. We're going to start with Uta Hagen and go from there. But there are many ways we prepare our work, our arias, our music. And this is another way of taking our scores and taking the text from our score and marking them and dividing them up in consumable chunks so we can have meaningful and direct and honest and efficient conversations on stage with our castmates and with our audience. These tactics should be able to be used in a myriad of formats whenever you are acting a piece or presenting a piece. One thing that is of note when working on these kind of styles is that it is not a one-size-fits-all. Opera by its very nature is melodrama, which is something I didn't admit until very recently. And I was definitely kind of crying like that scene in But I'm a Cheerleader when she admits that she's a homo, just me sobbing with snot coming in my nose being like, opera is melodrama and I love it. Because that's inherently what it is. You're looking at the music as part of our subtext. A lot of times music will do some very heavy lifting for you, although you are also doing that heavy lifting yourself. When you are acting in a regular play, when you're just delivering words, as they call it, dry, that you have to determine your rhythms. You have to decide when to breathe. Acting in a very traditional sense is about spontaneity of breath that comes from listening. However, with music, we have to plan our breaths, and our rhythms are often given to us. So there's a bit of a different tactic there. And how we approach our text and how we approach our acting strategies once we are on stage. But before that, as far as understanding a character, we still need to have an understanding of where this character is coming from and who they are. And what I'm going to give to you today is kind of a system for developing that, and then a brief introduction on how to start breaking down the words you are saying in scenes and in arias so that they are in actable chunks, and that all the work you do on knowing who this person is actually actionable or implementable on stage, and you can actually have very real results. One of the things we're going to start with, for the record, we're going to be using Brian Murray's The Crucible, based on the play Arthur Miller. And one of the reasons I picked this is it's a pretty clear way. We're gonna look at a wonderful, wonderful scene that we all know and love. What keeps you so late, right? Start that here a little bit. That's rough, that's rough. And there we go. Right, we're gonna look at Act 2 here, What Keeps You So Late, just the beginning here. So we'll just take a listen.
This form is the size of our continent. When you go foot by foot, going you see. Soon I think we'll see green fields beneath the clouds. It is warm as blood, so pray you now for a warm and speedy
Okay, we're going to stop right there because that's about as far as we're going to get, because I'm trying to keep this video short because Zoom fatigue is real. Great, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go then to our dear friend Uda. Uda Hagen wrote a book called Respect for Acting. It is considered the kind of consummate acting text in a modern American work and how we use this. And she developed something called 9 questions. And the 9 questions seem very basic, but we're going to go over all of them because it is going to be the foundation of your character. We're going to be looking at both Elizabeth and John Proctor. These are both 2 very different characters who have opposing wants. And it'll give you something from there. Great. So we're going to start off real nice and easy. Who am I? Who are any of us? This is like, who's your character? Identify all details, name, age, physical traits, education, personal opinions, likes, dislikes, fears, ethics, and beliefs. The idea here with all of these questions is you want to get as specific as possible, right? So with John, we know he's a farmer. We know he's a husband. We know he's a Christian. And he recently, if you look at the entire piece, there is a point in this opera very early on where he's very much so aggressively arguing with the pastor about the devil. So we might even get to say that he's that's not how you spell that, a skeptic, right? He's also a father. We know that he has sons. The way you'd pick up all of this is when reading through the entire opera. It is not just what a character says about themselves. In fact, often what they say about themselves isn't where your truth is. It is what other characters say about them or what their actions are. And that's how you find this information out. Great. Elizabeth, we know, is a farmer's wife. We also know that when John is talking about her with Abigail, that he's also talking about, Abigail mentions that she was quite sickly. So we could say that she is of ill health. Right? We know that she is a mother. We know that she's probably, we can guess that she's also a Christian. She doesn't outright say it, but she also does. Right? She's doing her best. I'm sure there are many, many additional other things that you can add to this list about this woman. One thing that we don't really get in this is how old they are. So we're going to have to go ahead and make an estimate here. You can kind of use your own age. The thing about all of these choices, and I go back to my Monster Jam days, is something we always said to our announcers, that it doesn't matter whether or not you screw something up, it's whether or not you let anyone know. So with a lot of these choices, as long as they are based in the text or strongly held, you want to hold on tightly, let go lightly, right? If your collaborators find new information or anything like that, then it's probably good to adjust. But until then, you can really strongly hold on to something. And you can just decide that, you know what, Elizabeth is 28 years old. And let's say that John, our dear friend Mr. Proctor, is going to be, let's give him 35 years old. This takes place in the 1600s. They didn't live very long. What time is it? So we know it's planning. He's talking about spring, right? That hits the year, the season, the day, the minute. What's the significance of time, right? How does time work in your opera? One of the great things about opera is that time is manipulated, right? Oftentimes when you are in an aria or a large amount of music is passing, you have to keep that music active. You have to justify the music in your action on stage, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how time is actually working in a linear fashion, right? Sometimes time expands or contracts, or it is in real time. It really just depends on the piece. We do know based on what we can gather about this time period, right? This is the time of the Salem witch trials. And I'm sure somebody out there is yelling out the date, but I'm not going to look that up right now because I'm giving a lecture on action. We know that it's spring, and we know that this is very important, right? It's going to be warm soon. So let's get really specific here. Is it late spring? It's planting season. We could Google this. You probably should. We all have Google on us. I'm going to go ahead and just like know this, that we know it's going to be late April because it's also up north. Great. Where are we, right? This is also something that we know about these characters, right? We know we got to get really specific. The city, the town, the neighborhood, the building, the room, the specific area. We are at the Proctor's farm. And we're definitely in the kitchen. This is important, right? Because this might be Elizabeth's domain in the house of her husband's, right? There might be some of that element going on here, and that's a choice that we can make in the where am I. We are in Massachusetts, and I can't remember the name of the town right now. How do you spell Massachusetts? Why can I never do that stuff? You guys are getting a lesson from a dyslexic, right? Back to what time it is. Just want to bring this one up. It's past dinner time, right? This matters. What keeps me so late? It's almost dark. What time is it? When does it go dark in late April in Massachusetts? And you know what you can do there? You can go ahead and Google. Oh, that's Pam. That's not what you want. Let's see here. The Crucible, Act 2. Let's get a new tab going here. When is sunset in Massachusetts on April 28th? Right. Okay, so it's almost dark. So let's say it's 7:30. p.m. Yes, you want to be this specific about this kind of information here. It's a very, very useful thing. In Massachusetts, let's also figure out, do a quick Google. Where did the Crucible take place? See, the internet is just going to tell you it's the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Right. Do they mention that in the opera? No, they don't. But it is a tiny little town, right? So we can actually even do a little research here. This kind of comes later, right? But it is something very important to know, and this is something you are going to want to do as a tertiary read. You can't just focus on the music because music is not the only element of opera. But I digress. Back to what we're doing here with Uda. Great. We do know that the farm is outside of town because he does bring that up, that he's not going to go all the way into town to hear his preacher ask for gold candlesticks, right? That's also in scene 1 or act 1. So that's also very important. Side of town. Great. This is important to both of them. Great. What surrounds me? This is very, very, very useful, right? Weather, landscape, people, inanimate objects, right? Where are the children outside? The children aren't here, or are they sleeping? So that the children upstairs sleeping, which might explain why the music starts off as quietly and gently and yet angrily as it does, right? So let's go ahead and say the kids are upstairs sleeping. It's beautiful, right? He talks about how pretty it is and full of flowers outside, right? It's farmland owned by the Proctors, right? They're on their own farm. They're at home. It's a very intimate environment. That's something you remember. You act very differently when you are on a piece of property that you own than you do on something that you are rented on. You act differently as a human being when you are in a place that is yours and safe than you do in, say, a mall, right? That's a very different environment. And that is part of our job as performers, is that of observation. How do I act differently in these environments? How does anyone act differently in these environments? As they call it, it is your dramatic imagination. Are we hearing crickets? Do we hear sounds? Let's say, yeah, we hear some crickets. No bugs yet, right? It's still spring. But that's an important one, right? The Chekhov doesn't really, that this originally came out of, it isn't funny unless you remember that it's incredibly hot out in most of his scenes and flies are biting, right? So how do you actually act with a fly biting, right? That's also an important element of all this, is what surrounds you is actually incredibly important in your dramatic imagination and how you are developing your character when you are doing anything that is based out of realism, which most modern American opera and most anything that was written in the 1800s onward has elements of. Given circumstances, this is the one that is going to constantly be getting edited by you, right? Your given circumstances are super important to everything, and it is everything that runs underneath the scene. What they often say here in the given circumstances is that the goal of this is to be the duck, right? And this is what I often mean when I say be in conversation with your music and justify your music instead of acting with your music, right? Or on your music. So your given circumstances in this situation, if we notice that dear Elizabeth comes into this scene very, very tentatively, right? She comes in, we're gonna play it again.
What keeps you so late? It's nearly dark.
So as we can hear that with Elizabeth, she is not just concerned about him actually being late, right? There's something underneath that. There is a fervent need and anger that is happening in her song that has to do with her given circumstances, right? What has happened? What is happening? What is going to happen, right? So we got some witch trials, super upsetting. We got neighbors after their land. And then the big one that we're not talking about in this scene, but we totes are talking about, Mr. Proctor had an affair, which, knowing that they are good old solid conservative Christians, is probably a big deal. It'd be a big deal anyway, right? This kind of violation here, but it is still a big issue, right? John's going through guilt about this affair, and Elizabeth is going through incredible heartbreak, right? She is having a very hard time. She had a bunch of babies with him, sons, and then now he went off and had an affair with the help. That is also something to be important to remember, right? With the servant girl. And everybody knows about the affair, whether John confessed or not. And Abigail was sent away, right? Which means the affair is out in the open. Apologies have happened. And we can also assume that Elizabeth is expected to forgive her husband. And let's say that John hasn't forgiven himself, right? These are all important elements in how we look at what our given circumstances are. These are incredibly powerful tools, right? There is a new servant girl, Mary, which we find out later in this scene, right? And Mary is participating in the witch trials. So, like, you could probably say that the top of this scene is super tense, right? Like, what is going on with Elizabeth before this scene happens? Like, is she wondering if her husband went off and like saw Elizabeth and had an affair? Is she worried that the Salem Gestapo, for lack of a better term, is going to come to her door and bust it open, which does happen later in this scene? Is she worried about who's going to care for her children? We also know that E has been sick, right? And she's also had dinner, right? And dinner gets cold throughout this scene. So these are the given circumstances. This is everything that is weighing on everybody's shoulders in this scene. The phrase is be a duck, right? And the duck glides very calmly above the water, but underneath the water, its little feet are doing this. And that's what your music is doing for you. It is doing the hard paddling. So how do you live with that hard paddling, with that music? How do you experience what's going on there? And you can get a lot of that from the music if it's well composed. Say that carefully. Well, you just glide through it. And you can just trust that that's all coming through, right? And allowing those big feelings to happen. What are my relationships? These are relationships to other people. We're only going to focus on the two people that are in this scene. This is objects, characters, and events. Another thing that you can actually put in this is props. And this is something very, very useful, is the milk jug that John Proctor pours milk out of into a glass. Is that Elizabeth's like grandmother's milk jug, right? Like you can actually put this in other significance. Is that plate of food getting colder by the minute and she has no other way of warming it? And she wants her husband to have a good meal because, as we know, like when you have affairs, there's all these feelings of inadequacies, blah, 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 blah. It's a lot of things. Does she still love her husband? How long have they been married? How much does she hate Mary, right? Like there are so many things here. So we're going to look at like husband and wife, props, which is things you eat with. Did your director like just really worry about you, John? Is like, here, come in with this rake or this rag. Like, is that rag where you're putting all your anxieties? Who knows? It's gonna be up to you. A hanky. I really love a good hanky. All right, what do you want? Now we're moving into the true meat of this situation and or portobello mushroom for the vegetarians out there. This is an immediate want followed by a major want, right? So does John want redemption? That's a big overall want. That is something he wants throughout the entire course of this opera. What does he want immediately in this room? Is it just Elizabeth to get off his back? Does Elizabeth want her husband to be kind? Does he want her to apologize? That is what we're going off here. So I'm going to go ahead and say that Elizabeth wants to be able to forgive her husband. Right? Let's give that a solid shot. And let's say that John wants to forgive himself. Great. So for the first section of this thing, and for each scene, right, it changes, right? Each like immediate objective changes from your uber objective. So although she wants to be able to forgive her husband, when he enters in that first chunk of your scene, maybe she wants him to say, sorry, I was late. So let's say that. Say you're sorry. And then later, when she tries to talk to him about how he needs to go into town and let go of Abigail, maybe she then needs him to do a totally different thing, right? Her objective changes throughout the scene. Maybe at that point, she needs her husband to make her feel special, right? That could be a thing, right? There's all sorts of options here. So the beginning of this, does he want his wife to say to forgive him. And then when the conversation turns to Abigail, does he want his wife to pretend it never happened? Right? You can change these, right? And they will evolve as you go through the process. Like as you're in rehearsal, your scene partner is going to give you different information back. And that is a conversation. These things should be written in pencil and be erased and follow through, right? But this is the immediate want in the scene, right? Maybe in this moment, he just wants his wife to be nice to him. Right? Maybe he just wants a moment of pleasantness. Great. What's in the way? For Elizabeth, what's in her way? What is stopping her from forgiving her husband overall? Maybe he won't say sorry and won't stand up to that harlot Abigail, right? I say this somewhat jokingly, or from Elizabeth's perspective. I'm not here to slut shame ever. For John, he can't forgive himself, right? Because he doesn't feel God's grace. Like, hasn't paid penance, right? These are conservative Christians. You can pull from that. His wife is cold, right? Is that what's happening in the immediacy of the scene of what is in his way? What is his obstacle? Our directors will call this, what is your obstacle? Here's the trick. You can't play your obstacle. When you are going towards a scene, you have to always actively pursue your tactics, which is what we're gonna do next. What do I get to do what I want? Reactions to both physically and verbally. What are tactics, right? This is what you're doing in chunk by chunk. And remember, to sing or to speak is an action. That is an action that you are doing. So you want to keep these things action verbs. And then we're going to go over action verbs. Here are my personal rules for action verbs. My personal rules for action verbs are that they have to be doable. They have to make sense to you, and you cannot use the same action verb more than once in a scene. Meaning, you also can't get them really close together, right? Pleading and begging are pretty close together. Yes, it's an action that you can do, but using them together is like as a synonym is making things fuzzy. Because again, what you're trying to do is have actionable moments on stage that are in conversation with the music and that are working towards your goal and mean something to you. Because if it doesn't mean anything to the artist that's actually using this, yes, you are an acting artist, you are a performance artist, then it doesn't do you any good. So now we're going to go ahead and move to the score itself. Here we go. So you can see here, I got some really awesome sticky notes. They're all labeled Maggie. That's because I am working off of my mother's work, right? And we're going to start off with this one. What keeps you so late? It's almost dark. I suggest you break this up into two chunks. These are two different tactics. Sometimes you'll hear a director call them beats. That's actually a misnomer. Beat comes from bit in a Russian dialect, so saith the urban legend. And then it's stuck in the American acting technique forever and ever. You'll probably hear me say, oh, beat it out. This isn't a musical beat, although it does think the same thing, because a lot of these tactic elements were an attempt at getting towards the musicality and rhythm of a piece. Again, a lot of your rhythm is in the music. However, it is important to keep these moments distinct and defined. So you can also look at your music for clues of when things are changing. I would say that these are two different things because there's space in between them. What keeps you so late? It's almost dark. right? So is this an accusation? Can she accuse? Is that actionable? Is that something you can do? Let's just say yes. Say she's accusing, great. And then we're gonna move on to this one. It's nearly dark. What if that's a beg? So what if, like, if we acted this, it would be, what keeps you so late? It's nearly dark. There's a shift there that happens that is something based on her need of what she actually wants. Because if we go back to what she wants in this scene, she wants him to say sorry. So can she badger him into an apology and then beg him for an apology? Is that something that she's able to do? So it is an accusation. It's a badger, right? Is it leaking out? Is there something there that is so, with her given circumstances, so much heartbreak? So let's say it's a badger. Oh. And then that's a beg. And he responds to that, right? So if you're playing John Proctor, you'd respond to this, right? Get this out of the way here. Today I wanted to finish my planting. Now he's being the provider, right? And I'd say out to the edge of the forest. I'd say that that is a full chunk. And then we have a new thought here. The farm is the size of a continent when you go foot by foot. Now there's something very interesting here. If we're looking at John actually wanting to be able to forgive himself, this starts to become something of a metaphor, right? If he is trying to forgive himself for this affair, which would be a failure of him as a husband and a provider, given his given circumstances of being a conservative Christian and having this affair, this is what's hanging on him. And she's begging him to come home to her at a more reasonable hour. Does he justify this, or is he explaining a different metaphor here? I wanted to finish the planning. I wanted to be your provider, but this is so big. My own spiritual needs are so huge here. I don't even know how I can accomplish it. Right? Foot by foot, sowing new seed. He's working through all of that. So could he, let's go ahead and listen, right? What is he doing in that moment? And what would you want to be doing in that moment? So that could also be a single beat. New thought. Great. So what is he doing there? Is he justifying? Is he pushing back? Is he defending? Are those actionable? Does that mean something to you? Which is also incredibly important. Is he begging? Please, woman, don't do this to me now. And also, I wonder, who is his target? Who is he talking to? Who is he acting on? You're going to keep an active target. You have to be acting on, right? What keeps you so late? It's nearly dark. That is clearly to John. Today I wanted to finish my planning. Let's justify. Is that an actionable verb? We could probably do a stronger one. We're going to go for that for now. This farm is the size of a continent when you go foot by foot. Is that maybe not, right? And I have some thoughts here. Is this a hold, like I'm holding her? Is this an exposition? Is this a plea? Or is this something even more complicated? We've been using beg quite a bit. What if this is not targeted at Elizabeth, but instead targeted at God? Why is this so hard? What if he, instead of looking at Elizabeth, then turns his gaze upward or turns his way out into the audience? What if he says, why is this so hard? What if this is a lament? Right? Foot by foot, but soon I think we'll see green fields underneath the clouds of dirt. That is hope, right? Is that back at Elizabeth? Is he inspiring her or reassuring her? Could he reassure his wife that he will eventually find spring again, that summer will come and God will be there and they will find forgiveness and heart for themselves, right? Does he then challenge at So Pray, or is this an entire thought? Is the entire thing a thing? And I would say yes. Like, I think if you lamented, and then we'll see green fields beneath the clods, so pray for warm weather. This is a reassurance that prayer still works, that home still works, that we can have that warm and seedy spring, right? Aye, for all the good that comes from praying. That is a rejection, right? Or a challenge or a push away. There are no right answers here. These are things you are deciding, right? And you could even do it, right? You get little things here, right? You could do I as a rejection for all the good that comes of praying, right? Is she ruining it? Is she turning it away? You could actually make this into 2 solid beats. Then an interesting thing happens here, right? He tells her to bring some flowers in because it's still like winter in here, but it's pretty out. He's obviously talking about how she's still mad about the affair. And then he asks her on a date. On Sunday, let you come with me and I'll walk the farm together. Right? So what could that be? What could that be? You want to just have 2 beats there and actually go out. And I wrote, ask on a date. Is that an actional verb? And you go through your entire scene like this with these tactics until you either achieve your objective for the scene or you have to change into a new tactic or a new objective, right? And that happens. I often liken it to going into a room for a glass of milk. Either you come into the room, you open the fridge, you pour yourself a glass of milk, then you close the fridge and you leave because you're done with the scene, or you go look into the fridge, you find no milk, and you leave to go find your milk elsewhere. You don't just arbitrarily exit your scene. In any basic scene study, this is true. And you don't arbitrarily enter without an objective. There is always a reason for being in the room, and there is a reason for every single character that is in the story, just like there is a reason for every single singer that is on stage. And that includes you. And that is how you use Uta Hagen's techniques to create your work. That's about all I have. Please know that singers are truly special, wonderful people, and that what we do is so important, and that we're going to still keep creating, and that we are fabulous ducks that tell very deeply important spiritual stories, and we will keep working. I'm also going to use this video to say that my email is kruger.rose, that's KRUGER.rose@gmail.com. I'm sure Pam will put it in a link somewhere on here. And if anyone wants private coaching, especially on English work, if you're bringing any other work to me, you should have it translated first. You are welcome to do so. And I would absolutely love to work on something with you. I know these are hard times for everyone, and none of us are making any income in what is already a financially fraught existence. So I will definitely do these for trade. So yeah, that's that. Thank you all for listening. You're all amazing, strong artists, and we need you. And thank you for your trust, love, and collaboration. I'll see you all soon, I promise.